Hello, I'm Neil Thind of Arun Associates and London Party Wall Surveyors, and this is Nick Huban of William J. Marshall Structural Engineers and Architects. This is the third of our joint presentations, and we are going to be looking at removal of load-bearing walls and the Party Wall Act. So firing away with the first question. Neighbours, homeowners, leaseholders, they often want to create more space and have structural walls taken out. Have you some advice or comment on that situation?
Yes, I mean that's a fairly major operation and should be thought about quite carefully. A major structural wall, you take it away, all the loads from the building up above are now carried on a smaller section of the building. So you've got to check the stresses. Any structure you put in place has got to transfer the loads carefully back to the supports on either side. Now, the problem sometimes is with a large opening along the wall, by the time you've carried the loads to the supports on the other side, the structure, the brickwork underneath will likely be overstressed, and you can't simply use pad stones to support it. This is where you need to get into rather more complicated structures. For example, I've got a little illustration here. This shows your standard load-bearing wall here. You're taking out a section of the wall, you're putting in steels to support the wall over. Now the issue is that the loads from this wall now have been carried down onto the steels and to the supports on either side. As we discussed earlier, if these loads are too great for the brickwork underneath the ends of the beams to support, we need to look at other alternatives. Now, a common detail that engineers use to overcome these problems, what we refer to sometimes as picture or goalpost frames. This is where the beam supporting the wall from here to here, instead of spanning simply onto the brickwork on either side, spans onto columns which carry the load down to a spreader beam at floor level. The idea is for the loads to come down onto this beam, carried to the supports on either side, down the steel beams, and then redistributed along the floor here. So the building doesn't notice that the hole's been opened up in it. The loading conditions down here are the same as they always were. But it becomes a fairly major engineering issue.
Yeah.
You can see here, again, we've illustrated the columns at the end of the supports here.
But equally, you could have a goalpost arrangement, basically, could you? Just like one beam across the top and two columns coming down, and they could be bearing on maybe a pad foundation of some sort.
Yes.
To then distribute the load to the ground.
Yes.
Which is a common arrangement with someone forming a structural opening in a say a rear wall of a property.
Yes,
they want to
right.
create an extension, so they have that sort of frame arrangement in place, that goalpost arrangement in place. Yeah.
Exactly. At the ground floor level, you've got the room here to put a pad stone in underneath the beams here onto the foundations below.
Yeah.
And the upper stories, you'd have the problems perhaps of neighbours with openings down below, depth problems, and so on and so forth. So the goalposts tend to work at first floor and up and above. You may have to incorporate that. Down below ground floor level, as you say, you can simply put in pad stones on either side, and it becomes a goalpost rather than a picture frame.
Okay. So just to explain, we can under the Party Wall Act, the removal of load-bearing walls, we could have a scenario where you're a freehold owner of a property, it's attached to a neighbouring property, you want to create an extension, and in that particular situation you need to serve notice on your neighbours for maybe inserting a supporting steel beam in the back wall, and then you have your column which is fixed to a party wall, and then you're cutting away part of the foundation of the party wall. So the cutting away, the fixing of the beams, and the cutting of a pocket in the wall, all
Yes.
that comes under the Act.
Yes, that's right.
So you've got that scenario, but equally you could be a leaseholder within a flat. You could be on the first floor, ground floor, wherever it is, and you want to create an internal alteration to the property, remove an internal load-bearing wall.
Yes. And that's where it becomes more
Yeah.
difficult, because you're taking away the support to an upper wall,
Yes.
and whether that's actually covered under the Act, I leave to people better educated than me to discuss. But there is a serious problem here that you take away a support, you've got to ensure that you don't get cracking further up the building as your new goalpost frame takes up the new load.
Yeah.
Steel is flexible, it deflects under load, as we all know.
Yes.
once you've altered a building, when you release your props here, you take away your needles here, having put your structure in,
Yes.
the building will shrug its shoulders and adjust to its new loading conditions. Steel beams will deflect a little to carry the new load.
Yes.
This can cause cracking that will echo up the building because you've now taken away a little bit of support to the wall. It's now perfectly stable in its new condition, but it's had to crack to do so, to adjust its new condition. Now,
So it's important not to really preload the beam so that it's ready to take that load.
exactly.
Is that right?
Yes. And
Because you take those support, those Acrow props go away. Yeah, there's a risk there of deflection.
exactly, yes.
Right.
As the building, as we said before, adjusts to carry out, to accommodate its new loading conditions, the new lines of support, the new
Yes.
pathways that the loads flow through.
Yes.
So, an old trick to do this is before you take the Acrow props away, one carefully either inserts flatjacks, which are like donut-shaped rubber rings, really, that are injected with resin under high pressure to act as a jack to press things apart, or simple timber folding wedges, where you have two wedges like that, hammer them together, and again they exert a pressure. And you do that between the brickwork and the beam below. So, having calculated approximately how much deflection you will get in the beam under full load, you put in your flatjacks to insert prudently, possibly half, 2/3, perhaps, that sort of deflection in the beam before you've taken the supports away.
Yes.
You then dry pack the beam in its new deflected position, take your Acrow props away, and the beam will try and spring back up to its original position, and the wall will try and press it down, and these two forces, equal and opposite forces, should pretty well equalise, so that when standing back, the whole structure hasn't moved at all.
Yes, and I've come across situations where we've had problems with damage arising because the beams haven't been suitably pre-stressed.
Yes, that's right.
And one particular scenario situation happened there where the Acrow props began to sunk into the ground. So you've got your needles. The props would be generally on a scaffold board. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
To sort of distribute the load. And they should be on a firm substrate underneath the scaffold board.
Yes, that's right.
Now, in this particular scenario, the actual Acrow props began to sink into the ground, and as a consequence of that, the structure that it was the wall structure above began to drop as well, and there was quite significant damage to the flat above as a consequence of that operation. Having been undertaken, that wasn't so much the pre-stressing aspect. That was more a failure of Acrow props. But I've also come across situations where there has been problems with not pre-stressing the beam as well.
Yeah. But it illustrates the difficulties you get into if you're losing your support from whatever cause.
Yes.
And this is why, again, the contractor, whether he puts lean mix on the ground, gravel base, whatever he does, needs to ensure that he's got decent footings for his Acrow propping.
Yeah.
And in most cases, folding wedges will do the job, so hardwood folding wedges are sufficient. It's only in quite large buildings that you need to use flatjacks, which are expensive, but if you're doing a major project, for example, the Dimco building at Westfield, which I jacked up there, flatjacks do the job, and you can actually watch the building move in real time as you load it. Okay. And buildings creak when they move.
They do.
It can be disconcerting.
So the actual, whether a party wall notice needs to be served, let's say you're within a flat and you want to do an internal alteration, often what you will need as a leaseholder is a license approval from your landlord.
Yes.
But you may or may not require a party wall agreement or the need to serve notice with your neighbour.
Yes.
I suppose that depends if you're cutting into the floor structure, because a floor structure is a party structure.
Yes, that's right.
And if you're not cutting into that party structure, you don't need to serve notice?
You may not need to serve notice. However, how much a party wall has a right of support, and if you remove the right of support, remove the support to the party wall, you're directly affecting the party wall. It's a difficult call, this one.
Yeah.
I don't know, but whether it's a party wall issue or not eventually, the engineer has to be well aware of the consequences of what he may be, any damage he may cause to the structures up above.
I would say if you're not cutting into the party structure, the floor, you most certainly will need to serve notice possibly on the freehold owner of the building.
Yeah.
You know, particularly if you've got let's say the horizontal, you know, the goalpost, the horizontal beam. If it's going into the party structures,
yes,
it does certainly need that
notified,
as well as a license approval from the freehold owner.
Right. Yeah. So again, these things, another quite difficult, quite complex problem that has to be, frankly, quite carefully thought out and planned.
Yes. Yes.
It's with one of the more difficult operations, one of the ones where you're more likely to have problems, not perhaps serious problems, but unexpected cracking in a part of the building that you need to be aware of the risk of and take it into account in the design.
Okay, so if you're creating a structural opening, you're saying a semi-detached house or a terraced property, and you're creating a structural opening in your back wall, and you're going to be putting in one of these goalposts either side of the party wall. Yeah, that's going to be going down and it's going to actually it's going to clash with the foundation of the party wall. Is that would be correct?
It depends how far in. Yeah. Ideally, you want to avoid disturbing the party wall foundations, because if you go back to this picture, for example, if you're putting a goalpost in, hopefully here you're above the foundations and you're within the depth of the floor. Your steel beams are there, they're cased in concrete, or you've probably got reinforced concrete beams. But the idea is to avoid disturbing the foundations as much as possible, because that is the appeal of the picture frame here.
That's the appeal of the picture frame, whereas if the alternative would be some sort of pad foundation.
In which case, yes.
In which case you are going to be cutting back the foundation of the party wall, and engineers would want to design that out or imagine that particular risk, yes.
And there, because you've got frankly shallow foundations in Victorian buildings, the sort you're probably working on here, you may well need to underpin the party wall there. Yeah. Because you'll be undermining it partially to put in your new foundations. Okay. And so again, this is where sometimes the picture frame has its advantages, even if you don't need it in terms of stresses, you can use it to avoid surcharging or undermining adjoining foundations.
So just to recap, the bottom part of that picture frame is the steel beam. Is that
it could be correct? Steel or reinforced concrete.
It could be reinforced concrete, and that's sitting on that if it's the ground floor, that's sitting on a trench foundation of some sort.
That will be sitting probably back on the original foundations, which maybe up here, maybe down there. The idea is for this to replicate remember this is standing in for the original wall, so it's bearing on the same thing as the original wall was bearing on, and it's the spread, it's spreading the loads back all the way along the underside, all the way along the underside here.
Okay. So typically it'll be on the original foundation.
That would be the idea.
You're not taking out the foundation, you're using the existing to spread
that's the virtue of this idea, that it hopefully avoids these sort of nasty underpinning problems. Because after all, if you're underpinning locally on the party wall, you need transition structures there to bring the underpinning back up to the level of the adjoining wall. Okay. So it can get quite complex and difficult, and it's something that should be avoided.
Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate your guidance on this matter, and that's the end of this particular presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. This has been brought to you by Arun Associates and William J. Marshall. We hope to be making further presentations to you in the near future. Finally, if you are planning any building works to your property or to a leased property, you will need to comply with building regulations and acquire the necessary consents.